Hey, this is the Fight Nerd, and we are back for another old school MMA review. And this time, amidst a torrent of controversy that runs deeper than Niagara Falls, it's time for the Ultimate Fighting Championship 12 Judgment Day. I am the
That's
Fight Nerd,
right.
Matthew Kaplowitz, and joining me on the other side of the screen, as always, Zane Simon from BloodyElbow.com. Zane, are you ready for this waterfall of no holds barred combat?
I am. I am so ready. Judgment Day has arrived, and it couldn't be better except if it were actually near a waterfall like it was supposed to be and not in the middle of Georgia.
Yeah, that was an interesting. This is a very interesting event here at UFC 12 in Dothan, Alabama.
Or
This is the
Alabama,
first event.
right?
Yep, first event of our new season, I guess we'll call it, of the OSMMA review, which is now, I guess we can say we're officially in the dark ages now. This is officially the
Yep.
time when the UFC was pretty much blacklisted off a lot of pay-per-view channels and carriers, and it only gets worse from here, folks. This was just the beginning, and this was really a benchmark event because of what happened. Zane, I mean, this event was supposed to take place originally in New York, and that's also why they mentioned Niagara Falls in the opening video. But the event's actually taking place here in Alabama.
Yeah, it got canceled at the last minute. They pulled the plug on the ability for the UFC to put on the event there. And I think it sounds like it may have had something to do with uh, Don Fry not being able to compete there as well, like them not approving him either. Did you catch that later on in the event?
Yeah, I did catch that. We'll talk about that for sure later. I don't. I think that was just a part of it, though, to me.
Yeah.
But I think the much bigger thing is really just the fact that New York said no, we don't want this here,
Yep.
and they had to basically day of the event that night fly everything out, all the fighters, all the families, all the production crew out to Alabama to host this show.
Yeah. No, it was bad, and they didn't really, amazingly, they didn't really quite talk about it. It was just like this little undercurrent running during the show.
Yeah, it was briefly mentioned in the beginning, like we said. Then they just kind of tried to ignore it. I think really the only time it
Yep.
comes up again is when Don Fry is on camera much later on in the show, because Don Fry was supposed to be at this event tonight, but that's also been changed. It's a big night of change here at the UFC. There's a lot of major changes that are happening now, not just internally, but what everybody's seeing on TV. It's going to be a fun night, UFC 12.
Yeah, and I mean, how could it not be fun? They're at the one-time peanut capital of the world, you
And
know?
also, it's the number one place to live in Alabama at the time. So how can it not get any better than that?
That's right. I mean, they may have given up Niagara Falls, but they've got peanuts and they've got the best place to live in Alabama, which, I mean, that's got to be worth something, right?
I think we should use "We've got peanuts" as our new phrase to end every show.
We've got peanuts. Yes, either that or the best place to live in Alabama.
OSMMA review: the best place to live in Alabama. So, a few
Uh,
statistics before we get started. This event takes place on February 7, 1997. So this is the first, and it's 3,100. I don't know how many into that. Buy rate was only, I believe, 122,000, which is only down from 2,000 from the Ultimate 96. So that's pretty good, all things considered. They're riding a very high wave right now. Numbers didn't change much despite what craziness is happening.
yeah, I mean, I think they did a good job. It showed, I think, the popularity of the fact that the people who wanted to watch their events were finding whatever carriers were still available as the UFC was losing them. You know?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember actually while we're talking about this too, like what led to a lot of the cause of the changing from New York to Alabama. And I remember I think a lot of this had to do actually with, or at least a lot of this was blamed on John Pretty's Battlecade organization, which had been
Yeah.
marketing in New York, I believe, and they were kind of pushing their version of MMA or no holds barred combat, whatever you want to call it at this point, essentially more as a brutal kind of death match kind of thing. Even though that wasn't the case in Battlecade either. Battlecade was probably arguably
Like
a much
more.
higher level of MMA, in fact, than what the UFC was putting on right now. But I think
Yeah.
a lot of that had to do with just their advertising campaign, and that fed into the just general mistrust of Ultimate Fighting, and that's why we're here in Alabama.
Yeah, it was an ugly scene at this point. I mean, they even very briefly like cut to a T-shirt that some guy was wearing, and it's one of those weird things that I'm sort of shocked that they didn't spend more time talking about it publicly on their broadcasts, because I think for a lot of people it sort of left a black hole as to what exactly was happening in the history of the sport at that time.
Yeah, I think they were just trying to play it off like nothing major had happened. It wasn't a big deal, even though it was a very big deal. But I think at this point they were just trying to play it very safe, not acknowledge it. And I actually wrote down what that shirt said because, yeah, there was some fan in the audience that had that shirt on it, acknowledged it, that they cut to on the camera, and his shirt said, there we go, why is the UFC in Alabama? Because New York only allows street gangs to whip your ass. Classy shirt.
Yes, very classy. Not addressing it, but totally willing to cut to some guy's slightly racist or slightly overly weirdly politicized shirt about New York.
Is it weird that I'm just impressed that these guys had enough time to actually produce and silkscreen an entire shirt, and God knows how many shirts, essentially overnight, to hand out at this show?
Yeah, no, I mean that to the UFC's own weird carnival aspect, that is why they have T-shirt producers in their Hall of Fame. It's because their early T-shirt crowd was very good at putting out entertaining shirts at the time.
I think that actually was a local rock station's T-shirt. In fact, I think I saw the logo. Unless it was a sponsor, I'm not sure. Either way, it was. Yeah, I don't know what to think of the message that much as a New Yorker. I don't quite know how to feel about that, but it does kind of still match the sentiment today that, yeah, you can do whatever else you want in New York City, but you can't have a cage fight.
Yeah, it's very I don't know. It was a very strange thing. The whole thing is a little surreal, even to this day. The sort of last minute embargoing, and then you end up never having a legitimate event again in the city or in the state.
Well, there's nothing surreal about UFC 12 because it's time for Judgment Day. How was that for a segue? Was that good?
That was terrible. How about this? So the little man is back, and so is the beast. That's right.
That's good. That's a good one, yes, because as we mentioned, this is the UFC of change. This is now the first time UFC has implemented weight classes. Oh my God, 1997. So all you nerds, write that down. UFC 12, first time weight classes being used. And we have two weight classes, Zane.
That's right. We have lightweight and heavyweight. And that's sub 200 and 199 and down and 200 and up.
Sorry, that's where the big boys play, as they mentioned throughout the broadcast. It's kind of funny, even at this point early on, there's just a lot of kind of subtle mockery for the lightweights, I guess you could say. Like, no one wants to be a lightweight in the UFC.
Indeed. It was definitely, they brought on Tank Abbott, which never ceases to be their own little tragedy. But he could not help but continually mock the lighter weight fighters throughout the show when he was on broadcast.
No, not even the commentators, just even the fighters themselves, some of them were almost offended to be in a lower weight class, but whatever. We'll talk about that when that happens. So, yeah, UFC 12, two weight classes, and informing us about this, of course, is Bruce Beck and Jeff Blatnick, once again, our commentators. And now making their debut to do backstage interviews and post-fight interviews, we have a very young Joe Rogan. Wow, look at that hair back then.
I know. Joe Rogan with hair, and I gotta say, up front, whatever you may think of Joe Rogan now or, throughout his commentary history, man, was he so much better than anyone they'd put on a mic before him in that job.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's an insult or a compliment, but he was very green at this first show, but he was hanging in there, which is not easy to do.
He was way like, if you think of the other guys they had doing like post-fight interviews, even Blatnick's post-fight interviews are about as bad as post-fight interviews get.
Yeah, Blatnick was never a good interviewer, and it's kind of funny. It's like, you'd even question, did he actually watch the fights he was just commentating on? And it seemed like Rogan was just a very, very big fan at the time, very knowledgeable. He knew how to keep the energy going in the interviews, which is, mind you, not an easy task to do when you have a really tired, exhausted fighter who doesn't want to talk to you. But Rogan got a lot out of these guys as much as he could. So it was a very good debut. We'll talk about him as things go on, but frankly, he was one of the higher spots on the show.
Indeed. And so the other thing here, I mean, they kind of jump right into telling us about the fighters, right? That's really first and foremost is I gotta say, I think this first lightweight class they had, maybe not the best fighters in the world, but it's a lot better than it looks casually. You
Yes,
know?
I agree. There's some good names here. There actually are some good name power. We have taking on the lightweight side. You've got Jerry Bohlander taking on Rainy Martinez in the semifinals, and then on the other side of the bracket, we have Yoshiki Takahashi, Pancrase veteran, taking on Walid Ismael, BJJ fighter and Vale Tudo fighter. So that's a lot of experience on that side. And I think Rainey had some fights as well. I don't remember exactly. He wasn't. He at least had a pretty good training and some kind of cross training. Not that it mattered. But yeah, it was a pretty solid bracket.
Rainey, I mean, to his credit, and I did a little extra research on him. He didn't. I don't think he had much in the way of MMA, actual MMA experience, but they mentioned it in the broadcast. He was a high school wrestling champ, former Navy SEAL with black belts in judo and karate and taekwondo. But the big thing, like currently, he's one of the head coaches at Rise MMA in Arizona, which is where he's Chris Carriaso's head coach. So
good. He's still in the game then.
Yeah, even to this day, he's still in the game and still like a legit figure in the sport. And at the time, he was just one of Don Frye's training partners down in Arizona. But if you're just looking at him and you're like, oh, a guy who went 0-2 for his career and never fought again, what a scrub. He was actually a pretty legit fighter, and his fight with Bohlander was really pretty good.
All right, yeah. So we're going to talk about that in a second too. We'll jump into the fights. Let's just run down also the judges, the rules, all the rest of the nonsense we usually do. Joining us ringside for judges, we have Sambo champion Kurt Shear. We have kickboxer Jeff Mullen. And once again returning is Michael Di Pasquale, who's also running now the martial arts, the Martial Arts Worldwide Network on AOL. So they had their chat room going for this event.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering if Di Pasquale was in the chat room while he was judging fights. That was something that kind of left me like that. Like, it would be fun if you were a fan at the time, but man, that's a little shady.
Yeah, throughout the show, they kept cutting back to Michael Di Pasquale, basically asking him, how's the chat room going? And, wait, aren't you supposed to be a judge? Is that some kind of conflict of interest that you're busy chatting with people in a friggin' AOL chat room instead of actually paying attention to the cage fight directly in front of you?
Yeah, well, not to mention the idea that, like, fans or whoever was in there would have direct access to a judge while he was judging the fights. Like, you would be able to directly influence his decision, potentially.
Yeah, very shady. But what isn't shady is the awesome early 90s clip art that they're using in this, because all over the Martial Arts Action Worldwide Network page, it's like drawings of karate people and the rising sun and all this Japanese karate symbol stuff all over the place, and no actual photos of the UFC other than their logo somewhere.
Yeah, a yin-yang in there. I think he did say at one point that they were uploading live photos from the event to the webpage.
Oh God, can you imagine how slow that would have been back then?
No, I can't. It was very much like it was really fun though to see at that point how heavily invested there still was this idea of like no holds barred as a martial arts experience in a way that we really don't have anymore at all.
No, there was cross training. Cross training was a definite thing now. That's no longer an issue. At this point, everybody cross trains except for a few guys we'll see coming up soon in other UFCs. But at this point, everyone is essentially cross training, but they still have a very heavy concentration on one actual martial art. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's missing from a lot of today's fights too. Is there's so much cross training and emphasis on athleticism that we did lose a lot of that martial arts aspect.
Yeah, I mean, you don't. Like, I think there was an attempt at one point, and a sort of a courting attempt to really tie MMA and no holds barred to the martial arts community. early on, and unfortunately, the actual fallout of MMA seems more to be that it killed that interest rather than that it fostered it. Because most of what you saw was people with traditional martial arts backgrounds getting the shit kicked out of them and then having to defend how awesome their martial art was to everybody who just watched one of their fifth degree black belts take a beating from some guy who rolled off a bar stool.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how it had such a big influence, I guess overall in just the martial arts world, and how everybody started viewing martial arts and the functionality of what a martial art does. UFC was a big game changer, and you don't really realize it until you go back and actually start watching these old UFCs and seeing the evolution of the sport. And it's made a bigger impact, I think, than a lot of us realize or even remember. So
Yeah, no, it really has. And it's only now, I think, actually recently, that we're really starting to see where some traditional martial artists trickle back into the sport and once again have an impact and like maybe start to recreate those bonds. But there's a pretty heavy divide, I think, at this point between the TMA community and MMA.
absolutely, there's plenty of TMA people that do not like MMA at all, and on the other hand, too, we still have people that are into boxing or wrestling that still think MMA is barbaric cockfighting. So, and then hey, we're in the dark ages of the UFC. This is something we're going to be talking about a lot, I'm pretty sure, as we go along. But not much has changed, I guess, in that regard.
No, no, certainly not.
So our
It's
rules of the octagon this time, by the way, folks, we have essentially more or less the same rules we always had. For the semifinal fights, we have one 12-minute round with a 3-minute overtime if needed, and the finals will have a 15-minute round, also with a 3-minute overtime. And the super fight also has this, which, by the way, we forgot to mention there's a super fight tonight besides the heavyweight and lightweight tournaments. We have Mark Coleman taking on Dan the Beast Severn in a super fight to unify the tournament title and the super fight title.
Yeah, I actually really liked the format. Actually, like watching it, it really felt a lot faster and a lot smoother and more, it didn't lose the turn. I don't feel like the tournaments lost their meaning. They maybe weren't quite as important, but watching it, you don't feel the like just because there's two smaller tournaments, they don't feel less interesting. And then you still get a big fight on top. It was a very well organized event from that aspect, I thought.
Yeah, I agree, actually. I mean, unfortunately, that was also, I think, one of the shortcomings of the show, as we're going to talk about for this particular event. But yeah, moving forward, this is a good idea, and you can kind of see the UFC is planting the seeds to maybe eliminate the tournament as a format. But it's definitely shrinking the tournament from 8 guys to 4. It makes things move a lot quicker, and we're also getting better fights, I would say, because the guys have more time to rest, and they're also, they don't have to fight 3 fights to win an event. So you're still getting, you know, not the best guy, because the best guy would be there for one fight, but you're getting the guy that's close enough to keep going. It's having that one less fight to deal with makes a big difference in the quality of the fights, and we're going to see that as these tournaments progress.
Yeah, a
Um,
lot of the old fights, or a lot of the old events, by the time you reached the end of the tournament, everybody was just so tired that fighters were either like, you know, going out in seconds to nothing, just like the first person to push them down wins, but or just dragging on into these really ugly, slow, toiling bouts because nobody could generate any meaningful offense.
yeah, it's kind of a good thing we don't really do these one-night tournaments anymore. I mean, they've happened in the past few years as a one-off thing in other companies, but the gradual elimination of tournaments, it was a welcome thing. But I think this format it's actually really good for what this is, for what the UFC wants to do. So we're going to see how it works out, and I think this first show is a pretty good litmus test. So I think it's time for us to get started with our first fight of the evening. And by the way, joining us on commentary at the show, unfortunately not on this show, but at UFC 12, we have Ken Shamrock joining Beck and Blatnick. And he is also making a prediction tonight, and he's going with he has Dan Severn as the winner of the super fight because he is in better shape and more experienced.
Yeah, that and it's funny because that beyond the fact that he has a lot of weird sort of dialectical oddities to how he speaks, I actually like Shamrock is in commentary. He tends to do a pretty good job at this point, at least, in his understanding of the sport.
I think Ken is a very strong commentator. Actually, I've liked whenever he's been on microphone talking about it. He knows a lot. Obviously, he knows a lot more than Beck and Blatnick do. he offers a lot to it. It was just a little weird because he's commentating while one of his guys is fighting.
Yeah, that unfortunately the show was kind of loaded with Lions Den fighters, and so there was a lot of like, well, he could beat Bohlander, but probably not. You
Yeah, and
know.
that's actually kind of the perfect way to start this new series of OSMMA reviews because not only is this the Dark Ages, this is also now the age of the Lion's Den. The Lion's Den is going to quickly become the top dojo. Let's call it dojo just for fun because that's nice and old school. They're going to become the top dojo here in the UFC for a while. They're going to be the sheriffs essentially to beat, and it's going to be a while before that changes. But Lion's Den guys are going to be the thing for a while. And that brings us to our first match in the lightweight tournament, which is Lion's Den fighter Jerry Bohlander taking on Rainy Martinez, making his UFC debut.
Yeah, and I actually thought so we get the promos first up, and I thought Rainy Martinez, knowing it's eventually that he became a pretty good coach, you can hear that in his promo a little. Like, he actually sounds like he's pretty on the ball for a guy that's never done this before.
Yeah, he understood what was expected of him. Did he execute it perfectly? Not necessarily, because he's fighting a guy like Bohlander who's a lot more experienced, though. But in his pre-fight interview, he said his opponents are going to want to do what he wants to do, which is going to be the opposite of they want to do. It was a little bit of a rambly promo, but he got the concept at least of MMA, so I'll give him that.
Yeah, and whereas Bohlander sounded like he sounded like a paid actor in an infomercial. It's sort of like, now I can make my body work the way I want it to. Now that I'm on Lion's Den, like that was very much his
He said,
promo.
I have the exact line here. He says, he's more advanced than anything I do now. I don't know what
Yeah,
that means, but he's gotten better apparently.
yeah, and we also got the immediate weirdness too of Beck. As Bohlander walked out, Beck calling Bohlander the young stud in the cage, which, I mean,
This is a show that's marketed for Lions Den. I mean, again, this is the
yeah,
Lions Den era now, so they're pushing these guys heavy. They want them to look as good as they can, make them sound as good as they can. They are the baby faces of the company, and there's going
they
to be
are.
heels for them to fight soon. But yeah. So did you like Randy Martinez's entrance of holding hands with his entire team?
Uh, I don't think I didn't actually quite catch that. I was too focused on what I noticed is a typical Lions Den thing that you'll see from a lot of their fighters that Bohlander did, which is that he had his mouth covered when he walked out because I think it was Ken that was pretty sure was really like adamant that you shouldn't breathe in the smoke from the smoke machine right as you were getting into the cage.
Huh. Interesting information there. He was against dry ice.
Yeah, he thought that it was like had a bad effect on your lungs.
Is there any scientific data to prove that? Do we know if that's
I
confirmed?
know that breathing in a shitload of dry ice is bad for you. I worked over pail buckets of it in my lab job for a couple of years, so I can say as somebody who sat day after day directly over a bucket of dry ice that was evaporating, it's not that bad for you. No.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens later on in the show. We'll see if you grow tentacles or an extra eye out of your forehead, maybe.
I wish, man, we'd get so many more viewers for that.
Yeah, but between your dog and your tentacles, we'd have every market cornered in this show.
Or at least some very specific markets, depending on what kind of keywords we put in the URL.
Welcome to the OSMMA Hentai Review. We are live.
Oh, that's right. Um, but yeah, and they also had a new announcer for this. I think is this our
Yes.
first Manny Garcia announcing?
Yeah, this is the debut of Manny Garcia, and I believe this is his one and only event. We have a new ring announcer, Manny Garcia. He is one of the low points of the night. It's no wonder he never got invited back. He was not good. And by the way, too, before we start bashing on Manny, because there's plenty of that, I got notes on him. But I do want to mention Randy Martinez has in his corner, we mentioned he's an Arizona fighter. He's got Don Fry with him, as well as Becky Levi in his corner. And Bohlander, of course, being a Lions Den guy, has the usual 20-man entourage of Frank Shamrock, and he also had with him Guy Mesger, who's Lions Den now, as well as Mikey Burnett and Pete Williams, who we're seeing, I think, for the first time maybe in the shows. So we're going to be seeing them again later on, obviously. But yeah, the line's now starting to grow, and we're seeing preview of who's going to be popping up soon in the UFC. But
yeah, this is very much.
Let's get to Manny Garcia.
Hmm?
Manny Garcia sucks.
Okay, Manny Garcia, your complaints. I actually liked his voice. I will say that. I liked his.
I agree with that. I liked his voice too.
Which, if you're an announcer, that's like the big thing. Beyond that,
Yeah, beyond that, the man cannot read his cue card, so it's kind of funny because he actually doesn't make a mistake. Everybody else does. We're going to talk about that coming up soon. But yeah, Garcia has a good voice. It was a fine voice for announcing. He just can't read his cue cards correctly.
Interestingly, I noticed we've already had Bruce Buffer by now, right? Once.
We had him once, yeah.
He was terrible. But I can't remember if this was Buffer's intro or not because his first one was really bad. But Garcia definitely had like the exact same intro as Buffer, which was the "Fight fans around the world, are you ready?"
Yeah, I think that was just the UFC's thing now, though. That probably wasn't a Buffer thing as much. That's probably just the UFC's marketing campaign for whatever.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's interesting because it's still something that Buffer does.
Yeah. And also, one note, as Garcia is doing his opening spiel and he mentions fight fans around the world, he mentions a super fight, which is going to feature Mark Coleman against Dan Severns. Mark Coleman is going to fight multiple Dan Severns at the super fight tonight. I cannot wait to see him take on this clone army of the beast.
I thought it was Dan Severance. I thought that like he was getting some payoff for for time off his severance pay. That's what I was expecting.
I would be much more inclined to watch Mark Coleman do his taxes than hearing Manny Garcia announce any more fights.
All right, so Mark Coleman is either doing his taxes or he's fighting multiple Dan Severns. Those are your choices.
Yeah, I kind of want to see him fight the clones. I'm not gonna lie. I'm pretty excited to see that super fight.
It's true. That is a really good cap for the evening.
All right, and also, by the way, Zane, did you notice who was ringside at this event?
Probably not.
Okay, I don't think so because you're saying no. How could you miss him? Andy Anderson was ringside again.
I know he's always gonna be there lurking, and I think partially my brain just kind of blocks him at this point.
You got to fine tune your Andy Anderson radar. I mean, I'm seeing him pop up right away. I'm pretty sure it was him. It might have just been some Alabama hick, but I'm pretty sure it was him.
It was probably him. I mean, yeah, I can't imagine not Andy Anderson.
No, UFC without Andy Anderson is not a UFC I want to see.
Yeah. I hope there aren't a bunch of people that look like that and aren't him.
Oh God, there's Andy Anderson clone army.
That's right. So at that point,
UFC 13. Mark Coleman taking on. Sorry, folks. We're having a little bit of a delay on our video chat here, so that's why we're talking over each other occasionally.
What were you saying?
I was just gonna say I wanted to see Mark Coleman fight an army of Andy Anderson clones, but I'm sure whatever you're saying was a lot more important than that.
Oh no. At this point I had just launched into actually watching the fight, but we can talk about the potential for Mark Coleman fighting clone armies for longer. That works for me too.
I think that deserves its own show, so we should probably get into the fight, Zane. Take it away from here.
Okay. This is definitely a matchup of wrestlers. Martinez versus Bohlander. That was, for all of his other skills, really the only thing Martinez was looking to do was wrestle and get a takedown. And it was, it was a wrestling battle, and to its credit, a pretty good one because Martinez was a pretty good scrambler and, a fun fighter, and he just kind of scrambled right into the more experienced fighter's wheelhouse. But it's one of those few fights that I think even, going back and watching it now, looks a lot like modern MMA.
It was pretty close, but I think that's a lot more because of the ground fighting we saw. I mean,
yeah,
Bohlander was totally leading the way with low kicks early on in this fight, but once the fight hit the ground, Rainey was just kind of in a world of hurt because he didn't know really where to go. He was wrestling still. He wasn't actually wrestling for MMA. That was ultimately the problem here. And that's what basically led to him getting his back taken and being choked out in about a minute 24 in the first round of this fight. But yeah, I don't think Rainey was that terrible either. I think he just had bad luck against Bohlander, and probably wasn't a good place for him to make his MMA debut. But with some more training, obviously with more training, he's going to be a pretty good guy because he is still a coach in the sport. So it was just a bad first outing. That's really all I see it as.
I think it's one of those things too of being a technical fighter without the athletic tools necessarily. I mean, Bohlander just looked way more powerful and more fluid and all of that when the fight actually hit. Like when they actually connected, it was very clear that Bohlander was just a much stronger fighter.
That's what the Lions Den was known for, especially, was that they were off the chain with calisthenics and exercise. Ken being a pancrase guy, he was known for having serious calisthenic routine that everybody had to do. Just getting into the Lions Den, you had to do, I think it was like 1,000 squats, 500 push-ups, 500 sit-ups, and fight for about an hour with everybody in the ring. So they worked really hard back then, which is why they were the top gym for quite a while. And yeah, Rainey wasn't bad. I mean, for a first outing, it wasn't horrible because he got dominated by a guy that was a lot better, but he was able to handle himself a little bit better than other people would have in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, he actually, he went through technical moves that led to a mistake rather than just, watching John Hess fight
Anybody.
Andy Anderson, where it was Andy Anderson's not winning that bout because he made a technical mistake. Or not losing it because he made a technical mistake, rather.
Andy Anderson is perfect. He never makes mistakes.
That's true. I shouldn't even go there. That's, But one of the things I liked was that the commentary for this fight, Blatnick actually talked about Bohlander getting his hooks in and, actually, used some BJJ terminology that's still existent to this day.
Yeah, well, this is kind of the first UFC where a lot more modern elements are going to pop up, more than they have in the past. A lot of that, I think, also is, again, thanks to Ken Shamrock and the Lions Den. I think we really do owe a lot to the Lions Den for helping to make a lot of these terms more known in the UFC. And yeah, Blatnick was also training a little bit BJJ here and there, so he was learning a lot. He was picking up things, and we've seen him learning things as the shows go on. But in terms of his technical knowledge, it has gotten better over time.
Yeah, and so afterward we got our first Joe Rogan interview, which compared to all the other post-fight interviews that we've ever seen in the UFC thus far, is amazingly better, way, way better. In which Bohlander talks about how badly he just wanted to get that win and how he was nervous and all that. Nothing too illuminating, but still great. Much better than we've gotten before, and this is where we get the close-up of the anti-New York UFC shirt.
That's right, yeah. Right after the interview, which was pretty good, like I said, yeah, they cut that shirt, and but without much more of a hitch, we then go to the next fight, which is kind of nice. As we mentioned, the show kind of moves along nicely, but we do have our first hiccup here as we move on to the second match in the lightweight semifinals, which is between Waleed Ismael and Yoshiki Takahashi. So Waleed is a Carlson Gracie student. He's 5-0 in reality combat, as we're told, which, by the way, is now the buzzword UFC uses at this event for other MMA fights. They call it reality combat. So Carlson Gracie, BJJ black belt, notable grappler. On the other side, we've got Takahashi, who is I believe he's 10-5-1 already in mixed martial arts, pancrase fighter. He's fought Ken 4 times, as Ken constantly tells us. On paper, this sounds like a really good fight.
Yeah, and it's, anybody who's followed Waleed Ismael, or any of the rest of his career knows that he was a super legit guy. I mean, it's not just saying he was a Carlson Gracie black belt sort of undercuts the fact that he ended up being a very legit MMA fighter, even if he didn't fight a lot.
And Ismael had a big career after, and I think his biggest claim to fame is being the guy that beat Royce Gracie in a grappling match.
Yeah. Which is an amazing bit of schadenfreude if you are not a massive Royce Gracie fan.
And it's a bizarre fight to see, too, because it took place basically in like a pit of sand, which is one of the reasons Royce says he lost, because he couldn't really get a foothold or whatever. But, yeah, that's a fun match. If you haven't seen it, try and look that up online. I'm sure it's out there, Waleed Ismael against Royce Gracie. And that was a big deal at the time because that was Royce's first ever loss in anything, I think. So other than when he got beaten at UFC 3, which doesn't actually exist. But that's a thing that happened. So, yeah, this would have been a great fight, but unfortunately, it took about 30, 40 minutes for the fight actually happened. Something happened here in the broadcast.
Yeah, for some reason, Waleed Ismael decided that he wasn't ready to walk out, and in fact, this just seemed to be a Carlson Gracie thing because Waleed Ismael and Vitor Belfort, who we haven't gotten to yet, were coming out of the same, or Victor Belfort, as he's called here, which is not an announcing mistake, but is a bit of weirdness. We're training at the same camp, and they both had really weirdly delayed entrances at some point.
Yeah, but not nearly as bad as Waleed's, because I did do a little bit of digging. I couldn't find anything online, but I talked to some people who were actually there at the event. I got words from Susumu Nagao, who was the Japanese photographer at pretty much all these old UFCs, and to the UFCs this day he's shooting. And he told me basically what he thinks happened, because he doesn't really remember how long the delay actually was, but he thinks what happened was there were no actual, apparently, official weigh-ins at UFC 12 because of all the craziness with the flights and everything. So there's no ever official weigh-in event. They basically weighed in the day of the fights, and Waleed was complaining because he thought that Takahashi looked a lot heavier than the weight limit. He was basically saying Takahashi's over the 200 limit. He shouldn't be allowed to fight in this. Apparently backstage he was causing a lot of pain in the butt about that. They also think he was still warming up, which might have been a thing. He may have been warming up and just decided, I don't care, I'm coming out when I want to. But apparently, it's my understanding he was complaining about Takahashi's size. And chances are what probably happened is Bob Meyerowitz went backstage, said, here's more money, shut up and fight. And I think that's what happened, ultimately.
Yeah, I can understand that, too. I mean, Takahashi was not a small dude, and Ismael did not know how to strike, so it was a battle that was, for him, was all about strength and size and, sort of grappling, because that's one of the funny things is that we are now firmly past the point where people talk about, oh, Royce Gracie was able to show that you didn't have to be big and strong to win. He was this little reedy guy beating people with jiu-jitsu. But now we're at a point where that's not really how it works anymore.
No. And before we get into this fight, by the way, too, do you want to mention we have another Manny Garcia mess up? It's like our new Bill Wallace moment. We have another Manny Garcia mess up. So he says that Waleed Ismael is a student of Carl's Jiu-Jitsu, and that Takahashi is a fighter in the Pancreas Company.
Oh yeah, that's pretty miserable. I mean, how do you not prepare even a little? Well, maybe he was probably brought in at the last minute or something because of all this jumping around. I wonder if
I think he was probably flown in with everybody else, I have a feeling.
Yeah. I don't know. That's anyway, mess ups aside, all the weigh-in weirdness aside, this was actually a really good fight.
Yeah, it's like I don't know how to quite feel about this fight still because part of me likes it, the other part of me didn't like what happened. But it was enjoyable. Like despite its weirdness and a lot of its oddness, it's actually watchable. Like I wouldn't call it a bad fight for me because I don't really know how I feel about it still. I don't think it was a good fight. I don't think it was a bad fight. It was a fight I enjoyed watching. That's kind of what I could judge this as.
I don't know. I mean, I enjoyed it a lot. Takahashi had some legit punching power and some reasonable technique in his hands, and Ismael didn't, but you ended up getting a very good back and forth kind of clinch battle, and it was a very hard fought fight. And I think if especially in that atmosphere at the time, and knowing what we know now about the fighters as technical fighters, it was not like, I mean, it to me was very enjoyable. I think the big thing that only big downgrade to me was that Takahashi did not seem to understand one bit of the rules or have any idea. Like he just knew he was there to fight and that was it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what also put a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth because I actually, at this point, I had already seen Takahashi even back when I was first watching it, years ago. I already knew who Takahashi was from Pancrase tapes. I like Takahashi. I'm a fan of him. This fight was not really great showing for him, He was just grabbing the fence the whole time because he didn't understand the rules. He didn't know that later on there was going to be an overtime if needed, which was needed. Um, and then plus the grabbing of the clothes and the giant Wally Ismael wedgie that happens early on in the fight. That
That
was
was
that was pretty
hilarious.
horrible.
And when he pulled Waleed's cup out too, and then was
Yeah, that
kneeing
was
him in the
amazing.
groin.
That was brilliant tactic there by Takahashi to actually pull his groin club out of him, and oh god, that was horrible. Yeah, I think Takahashi actually thought it was a legitimately no rules fight. It wasn't. I guess no one told him the actual rules, but he thought it was anything goes.
Yeah, although he also thought that once he had hurt Ismael and the Ismael dropped, that the fight was going to be like that the ref would step in and give him a standing 8 count. So you got sort of a weird moment early on where Takahashi hurt Ismael with a shot and then was waiting for the ref to like step in and count Ismael to do an 8 count.
Yeah, but on the other hand too, like Wally once he got knocked down, he actually like put his hands up like waving like oh no no, and Wally stopped for a second. Or, I mean Takahashi stopped for a second as well. So I think a little bit of that is just Wally being like no back off, don't hit me man, it's cool bro.
Well, when you have a guy who only speaks Portuguese, and a guy who only speaks Japanese, and a ref who only speaks English, you're gonna get a pretty fun contest in an event that's billed as having no rules.
Yeah, I mean, and this was a fun fight. I guess it's just I wanted more from this. I wanted a lot more from Wally and Takahashi because I know who they are and I know what they can do. I would have had liked to have gotten a much better fight out of these guys, but Wally, he also just looked not in great shape either. That was a problem later on. His punching was not good at all. Takahashi was, in my opinion, manhandled him with the punches and he manhandled him on the ground, and as well as the ground and pound and his lethal headbutts.
Yeah.
This was really a Takahashi fight, and I don't know how much of it was the weight or how much of it was cardio or what it could have been. I just it was a fun fight. That's really all I can say about it in terms of if I like it or don't like it. It's watchable for me. I didn't quite like it as much as you did. It sounds like.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, honestly. I thought it was pretty great. Um, and then, at the end of this, since we did go to a decision, we still get the fun, weird, low budget, super low rent system of giving each judge a whiteboard and having them write the last name of the winner on the whiteboard and hold it up. Uh, Lost you, I think.
Yeah, a TV show or a movie would do. It's not at all like a real fight would do.
No, I mean, what it showed is that they actually had no scoring system in place at all.
Well,
You
that
know.
explains why Michael D. Pasquale was actually on the AOL chat room talking at the same time.
Yeah, a must system. They're not giving these guys points. They're just watching the fight, and whoever they think won, won.
Yeah, but luckily, it was pretty clear Takahashi won this fight.
Yeah.
Wally was walking into punches by the end of it too. He was clearly very winded. He didn't quite look ready for it. But hey, it was also cool by the way that we saw Takahashi throw an illegal soccer kick. That was a first, I believe.
Yep. Yeah, no, it was a fight with a lot of weirdness, and at the end of it all, we got a non prediction from Ken Shamrock for the finale of the lightweight fight between Bohlander and Takahashi, where he just said, "Well, Bohlander's my guy, and I've fought Takahashi a bunch, so I know them both well. It'll be a good fight." And then weirdly, Beck told him to get some rest, and then he'd come back later, and it was just sort of an awkward sign off for Ken there.
Yeah, I think that might have been an allusion to the shift in venue for the show. Maybe he just didn't sleep well on the airplane, or maybe he got airsick.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was weird, though. I agree, too. Maybe Blatnick just wanted to cuddle. We'll never know.
Anyway, because we are reasonably rolling on, we now get bout 3, Mullen versus Ferozzo, in our first bout in the heavyweight tournament. And we get our first introduction to Mullen, who I have a few notes on. Jim Mullen, it turns out, so he was an amateur heavyweight kickboxing champ. Although they promoted him as being having a really substantial pro record, and I'm not sure if he actually was a pro. May have been sort of like a pro-am kind of thing where he wasn't, wasn't quite, he wasn't of any world renown at all. But apparently he had rheumatoid arthritis if I'm saying that right. I'm not sure. He had arthritis really bad, and was told that he wouldn't be able to walk by the time he was 30, but that obviously wasn't the case. But directly between his MMA career and his kickboxing career, he tried a very ill-fated boxing career, and that's what he was coming fresh off of. But he got some actual coverage in like the Los Angeles Times for his boxing career for reasons that are totally, I have no idea why, because he wasn't an especially talented boxer or expected to be one, but his story got a bit of coverage in newspapers at the time when he turned pro, and he ended up getting like a 6-3 record before going to MMA, which I don't believe he fought in after this event.
Not too sure, but he does have a little bit of a prediction before his fight, as we see in his pre-fight package, where he says he's used hypnotherapy to ensure his victory tonight at the UFC 12, because he's used hypnotherapy to already see his arms raised, and it's already a completed mission. He just needs to go through the process. That was our pre-fight prediction and our pre-fight introduction to who Jim Mullen is.
He sounded so nervous in that promo too. It, he looked as nervous in that promo as he ended up looking in the fight, so it was very much a premonition that he was in way over his head.
Yeah, especially when you consider who his opponent was, which was Scott Ferozzo, who we have been a fan of. We've seen him already at a few UFCs. He came back in this one looking pretty good, I'd say. Pretty good shape also. I think probably best shape we've seen him in. And he also had cut a promo. And the last time we saw him was, I think it was at UFC 11 or Ultimate. No, UFC 11, I think it was. Yeah. And at that event, he was doing this whole, Ric Flair bad guy persona. And then here he is at this event doing a very soft-spoken promo saying, he wants to avoid going to the doctor because he's got really soft skin or something.
Yeah,
something like bizarre little soft promo, like very different from what the character was they were trying to sell, a few months earlier.
Yeah, he was very soft spoken to the point that it was really kind of off putting. And he was just like, yeah, I don't want to get hit in the head because I've had to make a few doctor's visits after every fight, and I'm tired of going to the, which sounds like really sort of like telling, like, that doesn't sound good or safe if you're worried about getting in the head so you don't have to go to the doctor. And apparently also he had lost some weight going into this to get into better shape, bringing himself all the way down to a lean, mean 323 pounds.
Yeah, it showed, actually. His body definitely looked a lot different. Mullen, however, is 215, so there's still over 100 pounds between the two of them. And that weight difference made a huge change in how the fight was going to play out. And speaking of the big boys here, we also have joining us as a guest on commentary for the heavyweight tournament, we've got our winner of the best promos, I believe, which was Tank Abbott.
Yeah, and this is what I can't understand, because the UFC, and in this event, they ended up having problems with Abbott all night on the mic. But for some reason, they gave him Ferozzo fights to commentate on. Like, that would be a real smart thing for somebody that you're worried about being a loose cannon.
Well, I mean, as they mentioned on the broadcast, Latnik asks him about his feelings towards Ferozzo, and he says he's got really no grudge against the guy. He was the better man that night. Those are his words. He says he was the better man. And I guess he didn't have much negative to say about Scott. He didn't have much good to say about Scott either. But it wasn't anything horrible.
No, and actually, I like Tank on the mic even for this event. I loved a lot of what he had to say, but it was just kind of a funny idea that they were basically kind of eventually setting him up for failure for how little they liked having him on the mic.
Yeah, I guess they just knew he was a popular face. They just wanted to put him on camera because he wasn't fighting again at this show. So I guess they're just keeping him in the fans' heads. But at least he brought us a lot of really great nuggets. Like I like when they first bring him in. He says, he's since he's doing the heavyweight and not the lightweight tournament. He says, he's not in the small time kiddie category. So again, we're disparaging the lightweight tournament once more.
And Blatnick immediately tried to shut him down on after that. That was sort of the start of the immediate, like, okay, no, that's not what we want you to say. When Abbott's just ragging on their lightweight tournament all throughout. But Abbott immediately came out with a good, a really good bit of insight straight off the bat, which was basically that Mullen was going to lose to Ferozzo almost certainly because he's just a kickboxer and boxer and has no wrestling or grappling training of any sort. Um, which I think Blatnick like had to take 5 minutes to consider, and then when the fight started, was like, I really agree with you, Tank. You're right. He is going to lose.
Yeah, as you're watching the fight unfold, no kidding, he's going to lose. He was in over his head against Ferozzo. The weight difference was clearly a big part of it, but even then, Ferozzo just looked better. Like, he was punching strong. His cardio was pretty good, also considering his weight. It was a beatdown. It was a good fight.
Yeah, well, it's funny. A funny thing I read, reading the articles and interviews with Mullen's trainers from the New York or from the Los Angeles Times at the time. Even his trainers were like, he's not the most athletic guy in the world. He's fast, and we want him to be crafty, and that's really where he is going into boxing. And like, if you're watching this fight between Ferozzo and Mullen, even as heavy as Ferozzo is, Ferozzo is the obviously much better athlete of the two of them.
Which is really bizarre to say, because you see the guy and he's got this huge gut hanging over him, over his pants, and then there's Mullen, who looks like, pro wrestler. I know, actually, to me, this fight even looked like an old pro wrestling kind of match, because you had Ferozzo in his long, tight pants, and you had Mullen in the trunks. It kind of felt like a pro wrestling match just from the look of it. But, I was surprised that Ferozzo was as good as he was in this fight. It was a total beatdown. I love the spine buster he even hit later on in the match when he did that big double leg takedown. That was a huge slam. And the rest of it was basically just Ferozzo just mauling him throughout.
And this is something that we've already, people who have watched Ferozzo fight before, and it's weird, and it's sort of a more modern MMA trend sort of idea, is that, while he was a miserable striker, and he even said as much later, which we'll get to, while he was a miserable striker and a miserable grappler, Ferozzo was actually a really good transition fighter. Like, he was really good in the clinch, and his ability to land strikes and a variety of strikes in the clinch, he just kind of beasted Mullen in this. Just trapped him against the cage and landed hard knees and hard punches, one after the other, and it was a good fight for him.
Yeah, generally Ferozzo is strongest in the clinch, like we said. And we've seen it in his other fights in the past, where he uses the fence and the clinch to really use his weight, push his weight around, tire out his opponents. But he's also active in that clinch. And yeah, that's what he did here, was he used that fence and that just smothering effect on Mullen, just beat him down for about 8 minutes. And not a pretty fight, but a dominant victory for Ferozzo. I have a note on that too as well. As the fight goes on, Mullen, the fight is temporarily broken up because Mullen has a cut on his eye. Doctors check him. They say he's fine. He's cognizant. They send him back in there. At that point, we see the most offense we've had from Mullen, when he tries a spinning back fist, completely fails. Ferozzo gives him a hook, drops him down, hits him with a knee, and then just starts knee dropping him, like a pro wrestler would do, to get the finish.
Yeah, I gotta say, for Mullen's credit, he was stupid tough. Like, he really, for as bad as he was getting beat, he was totally willing to go back out there and get beat some more. And did you hear while Mullen was on the ground and with his mouthpiece out and all bloodied up, there's somebody just screaming from the crowd, like, son of a bitch, over and over again I think at Ferozzo.
Yeah, I couldn't tell who was screaming at him, but somebody was pissed off at that fight.
Yeah. And no, it was a fun, like, weirdly reminiscent of the in like the worst possible way, the Z grade version of Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen 2.
I can accept that. I'm gonna go with that. That's a pretty good image. That's a good way to put the fight.
Of Mullen going for that stupid spinning back fist at the end and just landing on his ass and then getting kneed into oblivion.
Yeah, there's a right way and a wrong way to do a spinning back fist, and that is the wrong way to do a spinning back fist. Emmanuel Newton does it the right way. We've seen him do it the right way. Jim Mullen, not so much. So don't try and study him to learn that technique.
Yeah, more than anything, I think at the end of this fight, this was just one of those ones where you're like, if Ferozzo had actually like been in shape and had a good strength and conditioning program and been younger, he would have been a pretty dang good fighter in the era.
I agree. He had the fighter spirit. He had the fighter mentality. Again, this is a guy who took a beating and wanted to keep going. He was completely cognizant. He wasn't a guy that was just coming in off the street with a few skills or a few martial arts. He had an actual background in fighting. So I think with some cross training, he might have had a better chance. We might have, seen him again, but we never did. So we'll never know.
No, no, I'm talking about Ferrazzo. Mullen, I
Raza,
don't
okay.
know. Yeah,
Yeah, Mullen,
Ferrazzo.
forget Mullen.
If Ferrazzo had been in better shape, he could have been a good fighter for a little while, rather than like the year that he was.
I could have seen him, sticking around as more of a gatekeeper as time went on. Yeah, it would have been nice to see him stick around longer.
Now, Mullen, I think, just this wasn't the right era for him, and he actually landed one nice counter hook, but this wasn't the era for skilled practitioners in that way. You had to
No,
be big and strong.
especially if you're in the heavyweight division. If you're in the big boys, not the kiddie pool category, yeah, you need to be
That's
big
right.
and strong. And one thing we haven't mentioned yet, by the way, too, which we should, I don't know how we haven't discussed it, but there's not too much rules here on gloves. Like some guys are wearing gloves, other guys aren't wearing gloves, some are taping hands. Did you notice that tonight in the show?
Yeah, this is still very much the era of like you can go, of open clothing. So you can have shoes or no shoes. You can have gloves or no gloves. I don't think guys are so. I think we've gotten away from. We haven't seen the last gi in the octagon. I don't believe, but
No,
we're at the
that's coming
point.
up in the next event.
Yeah, but we're at the point where people are no longer wearing it because they know it's a stupid idea. But we're still in the era where certain heavyweights are wearing T-shirts. So.
Still anything goes. And by the way, Zane, did you catch the Tank Abbott commentary? And there was a lot of it, but did you catch the Tank Abbott rape joke he made?
I missed that. I heard Tank Abbott really not understanding the ability to land power shots inside and being like, oh, those are just little baby punches.
Yeah,
But
he still has a problem with those, which is kind of funny. He still doesn't like elbows, of course, either.
yeah,
He did also say that watching Ferozzo smother Mullen reminded him a lot of Glammy versus Johnson. It's funny that he still calls Glamrock, Shamrock, Glamrock.
yeah, I actually like that from him. But what was
Yeah,
the terrible rape joke that I missed? Because it comes as no surprise to me from Tank Abbott.
yeah. So Tank said he wants to fight Becky Levi. He just said it randomly. He just goes during the fight. It's like, I want to fight Becky Levi. Maybe late night in the bedroom. Nah, I'm just teasing you guys. Like he actually says it like that with like pauses in between. So he basically made a rape joke
Uh,
and recants it immediately after.
uh, yeah, and this is what I mean. Like, I like Tank Abbott. I missed that. I liked him on the mic in general. He was fun. He always was like very off the cuff, but I think he couldn't like you didn't want him on the mic for more than a couple minutes at any one time.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because he had a lot to say and not all of it was the best things to say. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, he was a guy who there was no like internal filter in his monologue.
No. So Ferozzo picks up the win here in this fight at 8:02, first round. And I think it's at this point that we are going to take a short break and come back with the rest of the show, which includes the finals for both tournaments, the super fight, and one more fight in the heavyweight tournament. And why are we taking a break with only 3 fights? Well, that's because the rest of the show, it's really short, despite having 90 minutes to fill. So we are going to come right back with part 2 of the Old School MMA review of UFC 12. Keep watching somehow, and then go to the next link. Get ready? Okay, ready? In 3, 2, 1, go now. Go now. What are you waiting for? Go. Shoot.